A tap on the car window jolted Claire awake for one terrifying second. She had no idea where she was. Then it all came back. The grocery store lot, the fogged up glass, the suitcase sitting right beside her, and the wedding ring resting in the ashtray like a dead thing. She was 65, and after 38 years, a driver's seat was the only room her ex-husband had left her. No bedroom, no couch, just a driver's seat. Roger had changed the locks the night before, quietly, legally, cleanly. He told the neighbors she was having trouble adjusting, as if sleeping in a car was just some passing mood by sunrise. Her hands were stiff with cold. Her coat smelled of gasoline, but she still possessed one key that opened something. It belonged to Grandma May's old family farm, a place everyone had written off as worthless, a rotting house and a leaning barn filled with junk. But her grandma had refused to sell for 40 years, and when Claire unlocked the door, she learned it wasn't junk her grandmother had been saving. She had been saving people, and this is Claire's story, so don't look away now. The first photograph she would find held a name on the back and a message that made her knees go weak. But she wouldn't find that photograph right away. The house wouldn't give up its secrets that easily. First, she had to earn it, before the name, before the message that would launch her search through a town that had forgotten its own history. Claire first had to stand in that doorway and face the one thing Roger had always held over her head. The place he called worthless, the farm her whole family mocked. The place Grandma May never explained, and now the only refuge Claire had left in the world. She sat at the end of the gravel drive, hands gripping the wheel, listening to the engine tick and cool. Morning light crept across the eastern Kentucky hills, touching the tall weeds. It brushed over broken fence posts and the old white farmhouse, which looked smaller now and had aged badly. The porch sagged. A shutter hung crooked, and the paint had peeled away in long, tired strips. Behind the house, the barn leaned toward the trees, as if worn down by one private defeat after another. Roger would have seen this and smirked, not at the decay, but because he would have felt proven right. He called it May's paper graveyard, and at family dinners he would joke that it was full of dust, dead people, and junk no sane person would save. Claire recalled those jokes so clearly now because her grandmother had never once argued back. She only kept eating, her grip tightening on the fork. That's what had always stayed with Claire. May never defended the farm. She just never sold it. Not to buyers, not to family. Not when everyone said it was more trouble than it was worth for 40 years. She simply held on. Now Claire got out of the car, suitcase in one hand and the old brass key in the other. Gravel crunched under her feet. A truck passed on the county road, not close enough to see her, but she instinctively looked down anyway. She didn't want anyone to see her not arriving this way, not after last night. On the porch, her hand shook once as she fit the key in the lock. It stuck, and then it turned. The front door groaned open, releasing a cool, stale breath that smelled of dust, old paper, and the dampness of too many shuttered winters. Claire stepped inside and froze. Boxes filled the hallway, piled under the stairs and lining the dining room. Some were soft cardboard with their corners caved in. Others were heavy, taped shut, and marked in May's careful blue script. Old Mill Road church programs, county school records, funeral cards, unidentified faces. In that first moment, the labels meant nothing to her. All Claire saw was work, lifting, sorting, and cleaning. It was another mountain to climb for a woman who could barely stand. She hadn't come here to rescue a house. She was here because she couldn't spend one more night in her car. A floorboard creaked under her weight. Something small scratched inside a wall, just once, and then fell silent. Claire made her way through the boxes to the back bedroom. It was small and plain, faded wallpaper, a bare iron bed frame, and a cedar chest. Inside the chest, she found quilts, neatly folded. They still held a faint scent of lavender. Her grandmother's scent. Claire held one close and closed her eyes. For just a moment, the room felt less empty, not safe, not yet, but softer than the car, and soft enough for her to finally breathe. She spread the quilts on the floor, then noticed the box. One box was smaller than the others, cleaner, and set apart as if placed there to be retrieved first. On its lid, in blue ink, were 4 words: Bell family, not finished. Claire left the box closed. Not that morning, she simply stood over it, a quilt clutched to her chest, reading the words again. Bell family, not finished. Her grandmother's handwriting was careful, firm blue letters with no hesitation, giving the box an air of importance, but Claire stepped back. She still felt the cold from the car, her knees aching from the drive. Her weary expression showed she could not take on a mystery. Then a memory surfaced of Roger's voice, quiet, reasonable, and carrying the subtle threat it always had.
Don't start something you can't handle.
With that thought, Claire left the box by the bedroom door. She moved on, but the words seemed to follow her into the kitchen, not finished.
My own life feels like a story someone stopped telling halfway through, and let another person write the ending.
She found a chipped mug in a cabinet and rinsed it at the sink. The water ran brown for a moment, then cleared. She drank, standing at the old counter where her grandmother once rolled biscuit dough and sorted photographs. An image came to her mind, herself at 12 years old, watching her grandmother spread old pictures in careful rows. There were women outside churches, men beside coal trucks, and children in their school clothes. Families stood before houses that were gone long before she was born. Her grandmother never treated the faces like clutter. She would touch each photograph by its edges, say the names aloud, then write them down. Claire used to watch, fascinated. The order and care of it all suggested a life could be held safely if someone bothered to remember the details. For a time, she had imagined working at the county library in Pikeville, or maybe for the Historical Society. Some quiet place where people brought old questions and left with names. Then Roger entered her life with his pressed shirts and easy answers. He was not cruel in the beginning, he simply sounded certain, which was the most dangerous part. He knew which bank to use, which forms were important, which bills to pay first, and which people were trouble. His control arrived disguised as competence. At first it looked like care, and then it became routine. Soon that routine built a wall around her life. Roger kept the checkbook in his desk and opened the mail before she did. He would place papers in front of her at the table, tapping the exact line where she needed to sign.
It's simpler this way.
And Claire signed because trust, when repeated long enough, becomes a blindfold. There was a library job once part-time, 22 hours a week. Claire kept the ad folded in her purse for 6 days. On the 7th, Roger found it while looking for a receipt and let out a quiet laugh.
Dead people don't pay bills.
He did not forbid her, which would have been easier to fight. He only made her feel childish for wanting the job, so she never applied. That was his method for making her small, not one single blow. It happened with 1,000 quiet reductions, a dream put off, a question unasked, a bank statement hidden. A visit to her grandmother was skipped because Roger said the farm put strange ideas in her head, and now at 65, Claire was in that same kitchen. She had no savings, she understood, and a suitcase sat in the back room like an uninvited guest. For the first time, a thought hit her with clean, sharp clarity. Roger had not only taken her home, he had taught her to doubt her right to have one at all. The farmhouse creaked, and Claire looked down the hall at the box. Bell family, not finished this time. She noticed a detail she had missed, a small paper corner tucked beneath the lid. It was not a photograph, it was a yellowed county library receipt dated 3 weeks before her grandmother died. The library receipt lay in Claire's hand, thin paper with faded ink, and a date from just before her grandmother passed. Claire read the book title on it twice, then a third time. Lost Families of Pike County. The words hit a little too close to home. Lost families, lost houses, lost women sitting in cars at dawn, wondering where they had stopped belonging. She looked down at the box waiting by the bedroom door. Bell family, not finished. Her grandmother had not been sifting through old papers for comfort, not if she was still checking out books and leaving receipts like breadcrumbs. Claire almost opened the box. Her fingers touched the cardboard, and then her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder flashed on the screen. County Tax Office. 10 in the morning, the house suddenly felt colder around her. Before solving her grandmother's mystery, Claire had to learn if the farm was even hers to stand on. She folded the receipt into her purse. She drove into Pikeville, her coat buttoned incorrectly, her hair hastily pinned back by 2 trembling hands. The county building was a plain structure of brick and glass, with a flag shifting gently outside. The building looked harmless, but Claire's hesitation suggested she knew bad news often came on paper. Inside, she waited under the hum of fluorescent lights as others completed their business with speed. People handled permits and tax forms with confidence. When her turn came, the clerk addressed her politely. His tone was not warm or cold, simply official. Claire's posture stiffened as she gave the farm's address while he typed and printed several sheets. The pages showed there were unpaid taxes, old estate notes, and a missing signature. They also revealed a deadline that clearly surprised her. The farm wasn't lost, but its future was far less secure. The clerk explained the payment arrangements and the other required documents. Claire nodded as if she understood, though her shoulders slumped slightly. For years, Roger had always handled the mail. He had kept the checkbook, he had always said he would handle it. And now, at 65, Claire stood holding proof that handled had actually meant hidden outside. She sat in her car with the papers on her lap. She looked utterly exhausted, her hands gripping the wheel. The farm was leaking, taxes were late, and the boxes were endless. The one person who could have explained it all was buried on a hill behind Bethlehem Chapel. Then her phone rang. It was Roger. She did not answer, and his voicemail arrived a moment later, his voice delivered in a calm, measured tone. It was a practiced, reasonable tone, meant for any audience. He said he heard she was staying out at the old May place.
Old houses can be dangerous, and legal problems tend to get expensive. Don't turn this into another mess, Claire.
Another mess. The phrase hung in the air. He no longer called her his wife or partner, just a mess to be dealt with.
A miss.
Her expression tightened as she deleted the message, the words still echoing in the quiet car. By the time she got back to the farm, a low sky hung heavy over the hills. Rain began to fall just before dark. It started softly, grew steady, then became a downpour that rattled the windows. Claire put a saucepan under a kitchen leak. She placed a mixing bowl under another drip in the hall. When she walked into the dining room, she stopped short. A dark stain was growing on the ceiling directly above the boxes. A single drop fell, then a second. A corner of the smaller box lid darkened, and its handwritten label read, "Bell Family, not finished." Claire moved instantly, but as she lifted the box, its wet bottom sagged and something inside shifted loose. She froze, her hands cupped beneath the damp, failing cardboard. For a second, the only sounds were the hard rain on the roof, the tapping on the windows, and the steady drip from the ceiling. Then the bottom of the box gave way and a corner split open. Papers spilled out, scattering across the dining room floor. Claire tried to catch them, but most of the contents fell in a messy pile around her shoes. There were photographs, folded church programs, a brittle funeral card, and a newspaper clipping yellowed to brown. Her exhaustion was visible. For a moment, she didn't move, as if content to let the house claim its secrets. Claire was cold and hungry, facing overdue taxes, and a house full of intimidating paperwork. The memory of Roger's voice added to her troubles, and now even a cardboard box was falling apart in her hands. But then her eyes fixed on a face. A small photograph had slid farther than the rest, stopping by a table leg. Claire bent down slowly, picking it up by its edges. The photograph showed a young black woman standing under a dogwood tree. She wore a pale dress with a narrow collar, her hair pinned back neatly in place. One hand rested on her skirt, held still, as if a photographer had asked her not to move. Her face was serious. Not sad, not smiling, just steady. The look in the woman's eyes made Claire catch her breath. It was a look of pure dignity. It was a quality that could not be given, nor could it be easily taken away. Claire carefully turned the photograph over. On the back, in her grandmother's blue ink, was a short message. Clarabel, find family. The sound of the storm seemed to fade. Claire read the words again. Find family. The phrase was a command, not a request or a question. Her gaze fell to the box lid. Bell family, not finished. The two messages connected, and the room felt different. This was not a box of old papers, but an unfulfilled promise her grandmother had left behind. Claire gathered all the scattered pieces and carried them to the kitchen table. Away from the leak, her hands trembled, but she worked with great care. A church program for Bethlehem Chapel, a school roster listing several Bell children in pencil. A funeral card for a man named Amos Bell, a clipping about a road project from 1968. A handwritten note from Grandma May read, Ask Mrs. Calloway about Clara's daughter. She may have moved north. Claire sat, the chair creaking beneath her outside. Rain fell in silver ropes from the porch roof, and the old kitchen was filled with names. Not famous names, not wealthy ones, not people who had buildings named for them. Just names someone had cared enough to save, and for the first time, Claire touched the papers not as clutter, but as evidence. It was clear her grandmother had been searching for years, and the family had simply walked past it all, seeing only junk. She remembered Roger's laugh paper graveyard, he had called it. No sensible person would save such things. She looked from Ruth's face to her grandmother's note. Find family. Something shifted inside Claire, not confidence, but a quiet pulse of responsibility. She had come to the farm out of necessity, but this woman in the photograph had been waiting there too. Waiting under dust, in a box marked unfinished, waiting for someone to finally care enough to turn her picture over. Claire gently dried the photograph with a clean dish towel, careful not to apply too much pressure. She placed it beside the yellowed library receipt, Lost Families of Pike County. The title now seemed intentional. Late that night, as the rain finally slowed, Claire found something else tucked beneath the school roster, a small, sealed envelope. Grandma May had written just 3 simple words. It read, "For Clara's people." Claire didn't open it. Instead, she set it by the photograph and sat with her hands flat on the table, as if the solid wood could steady the room. For Clara's people, 3 words, simple words. But they made the farmhouse feel less abandoned. Someone had been expected, not a buyer or a cousin hunting for furniture. Not Roger, with his sharp voice and cold opinions. Clara's people. Claire stared at the sealed envelope as morning light filtered through the curtain. Something in her grandmother's handwriting held her back. She understood the envelope was not meant for her, it was meant to be delivered. So she wrapped the photograph in a dish towel and slid the sealed envelope into her purse. She drove to Pikeville, the library receipt in her pocket. The town looked ordinary that morning. A school bus sat at the curb. A man in a ball cap carried coffee from the gas station. 2 women talked outside the pharmacy, their world unchanged. Claire parked outside the county library and sat for a moment before going in. The building had changed since she was a girl. New windows, a ramp, a blue sign. But the feeling was identical. Quiet paper. People searching for things they could not name. Inside, the librarian at the front desk looked up her name tag, read Beverly. She had silver hair, sharp glasses, and a gentle manner, used to helping people. Too embarrassed to ask, Claire hesitated, almost turning back. Then, recalling the envelope for Clara's people, she stepped forward and placed the photograph on the counter. She presented only the picture. Beverly adjusted her glasses, her expression showing polite curiosity.
Where did you get this?
My grandmother's farm, a damaged box, the name Clarabel on the back, and a note about finding family.
Beverly did not interrupt. She listened intently, as if every small detail truly mattered. Then she took out a notepad and wrote one name, Tanya Bell Harper, a middle school history teacher, still local.
Her family roots went back before the mines, Beverly said. Tanya had been researching Bell family history for years. Especially the women whose records had simply vanished between old church files and the county ledgers. Claire felt a chill. Vanished. The librarian made a call. Claire waited by the history shelves, gripping her purse, scanning the framed photos on the wall. There were coal camp families, school children in neat rows, and a church picnic from 1951. Faces were preserved because names had been written beneath them. She wondered how many others remained unnamed. 20 minutes later, Tanya Bell Harper entered the library. She was in her late 40s, school badge still on, coat half-buttoned as if she had left in a rush. She greeted Beverly, then looked at Claire with kindness and caution. She wasn't suspicious, but guarded. Claire unfolded the dish towel, and for a few seconds, no one spoke.
Tanya stared at the photograph, then lowered herself slowly into the chair. Her fingers went to her mouth, but she kept her composure. That's Clara.
Claire remained perfectly still.
My grandmother always said Clara had eyes that looked right past trouble, but we never had a single picture.
The ordinary sounds of the library seemed to fall away.
Tanya leaned in, reading the words on the back. Clarabel found family, the tension in her face softened into a look of profound recognition. All these years, we knew her name, we just never knew her face.
A look of understanding crossed Claire's face. Grandma May had not just saved a photograph, she had preserved a meeting, a connection meant to happen long after the women in the picture were gone. Claire reached into her purse and retrieved the sealed envelope.
Tanya saw the words written on the front. For Clara's people this time, her hand trembled as she took it, but she did not open it right away. Mrs. Ward, are there more boxes like this?
A distant look came into Claire's eyes, as if she was seeing the house, the hallway, the dining room, and the walls of names waiting in the dust. For the first time, a new kind of fear was visible on her face. The answer was yes, and it was clear she had no idea how many family stories her grandmother had left unfinished. The next afternoon, Tanya arrived at the farm, and she did not come empty-handed. She brought cotton gloves from the library, a fresh box of manila folders, and a legal pad. She also carried a quiet seriousness, the kind people have when they know they are part of something much larger than a simple favor. Claire watched her park by the rusted mailbox, and a wave of embarrassment washed over her. The grass was far too high. The porch boards were warped. A window was patched with cardboard. This was not a place one invited guests into. Not when a person was sleeping on quilts in a back room with half their life sitting in a suitcase by the wall. But Tanya's gaze did not linger on the peeling paint. Her attention was fixed on the stacks of boxes. The moment she stepped into the hall, her expression changed not to pity, but to intense focus, and that alone made Claire stand a little taller. They started in the dining room, where Claire had moved the bell box away from a leak in the ceiling.
Tanya opened her notebook and wrote a neat heading at the top of the page, Bell Family, Unfinished.
Then they began sorting with slow, careful deliberation, one paper at a time. A church program from Bethlehem Chapel, a school list from 1949. There was a news clipping about a road-widening project.
Tanya read each piece in a low voice, as though speaking louder might disturb the past. A handwritten note suggested Ruth's daughter might have moved to Ohio.
As Claire listened, a clear pattern began to emerge. Grandma May had not gathered these things randomly at all. There was a system under the dining room window, sat boxes labelled with road names. Old Mill Road, Dry Creek Hollow, Laurel Branch, Harlan Turnpike. Near the fireplace, there were boxes organised by local churches. Bethlehem Chapel, New Hope Baptist, St. Agnes Mission, Mount Zion, Coloured Methodist, and along the hallway were boxes filed by family names. Bell, Harris, Mendoza, Keir, Calloway, Freeman, and in the parlour, under an old quilt, were boxes with labels that made Tanya stop writing. Displaced families, unclaimed photographs, names misspelled in county records. Children sent away. The character of the house seemed to shift around them, changing in meaning. What had appeared to be clutter was now revealing itself as a map, a rescue effort, a life's work dedicated to keeping people from being forgotten.
Mrs. Ward, this is an archive.
An archive, not a hoard, not a Messon archive. Claire looked around at the boxes Roger had so often mocked. These were the boxes cousins wanted to throw out, the boxes Grandma May had protected while people whispered behind her back. For the first time, the full scope of their insults became painfully clear. They hadn't simply misunderstood May. They had dismissed her entirely because what she saved did not appear valuable to them. There was no silver, no cash, no land deals, no furniture to fight over, just the histories of people who had very little power to begin with. Tanya opened another folder. Inside were baptismal records, funeral cards, tenant lists, and photos with question marks where the names should have been. Some notes were in May's firm hand, others were from different people, with writing that was shakier, older, and sometimes barely legible. One note read, "My mother worked at the Hargus farm. Nobody spells her name right." Another said, "Please keep this. My boys won't care." A third was marked, "Only picture we had before the fire." Claire sat down slowly, as if under a great physical weight. People had brought Grandma May their last fragments, their only proof, their final scraps of family memory. May had guarded them through storms and through unpaid bills. Through relatives calling it all nonsense and Roger laughing at her work, Claire gripped the dining room chair, trying to steady her own breathing. Her thoughts turned to her own suitcase and how easily a life could be reduced to so little.
What is this?
Claire asked. Tanya laid the notebook open between them there. In blue ink beneath a list of family names was a single sentence.
If the farm sells before this is sorted, they disappear again. Claire read the words once. Then she read them again. The answer to 40 years of refusal was right there in plain sight. Grandma May had never been stubborn about the land. She had been guarding the only space left for people. No one else had room for Claire. Looked toward the hall where more boxes waited in the shadows.
Then Tanya reached behind the notebook and pulled out a folded page that Claire had not seen before.
At the top, her grandmother had written, "Do not give the clearance man access to the parlor boxes." Claire felt the air catch in her throat. Clearance man, someone else had tried to get to these boxes. Those words on the folded page changed the feeling in the room.
Do not give the clearance man access to the parlor boxes.
Claire read them again slowly. A clearance man, not a buyer. Not a neighbor or a cousin. A clearance man, the phrase sounded just ordinary enough to hide behind. Like someone hired to empty a house with a truck and a clipboard, and no reason to ask why one box of old photographs might matter. But Grandma May had warned someone to keep him away from the parlor boxes specifically. That meant she wasn't afraid of the farm falling apart, but of the historical records being removed.
We need to know who that was.
Claire did not answer right away. Her gaze moved across the room, past the labels and notebooks to the damp stains drying on the ceiling. For the very first time, the farmhouse did not feel like a broken place she had merely escaped to. It felt like a place that had been holding its breath, and over the next few days, the rhythm of Claire's life began to change. It was not a quick or dramatic shift, but it was a change she could feel. Tanya came by after school with folders and a small scanner from the library. Beverly sent archival sleeves with a handwritten note taped to the box. A deacon from the church stopped by to check on the worst leak in the dining room ceiling. He asked no personal questions. He just looked at the brown stain and said the roof needed patching before the next storm arrived. That simple kindness nearly undid Claire, not because it was grand, but because it was practical. No one was telling her she was foolish. No one told her she could not handle it. They were simply helping her to handle it. Even so, Claire remained cautious, working with one family at a time. No original items were to leave the house, and no one dug through boxes alone. Every name was written down with precision. Every unknown face was marked as such, not simply ignored. These became her rules. She did not realize she had created them until Tanya smiled and wrote them on a yellow legal pad. Ward Farm Records Handling Rules. Claire stared at the title. They were records, not junk, not just somebody's clutter. The first visitor came that Thursday. Mr. Harold, age 78, arrived in a pickup with a cracked taillight, his cap folded in his hands. He said that Tanya had mentioned there might be some photographs from Dry Creek Hollow. He stood in the hallway like a man entering a sanctuary. Claire led him to the dining room table, where Tanya had placed 3 folders. For several long minutes, nothing was said. Mr. Harold carefully turned the photographs over with one finger. Then he stopped. His entire expression transformed. The photo showed a barefoot, thin-shouldered boy standing by a mule, grinning as if he had just done something he was proud of. Mr. Harold touched the photograph's edge. "That's my daddy." No one spoke. The rain-damaged house seemed to grow quiet around him. He said his father had never liked having his picture taken, and the family had lost most of their photos in a house fire in 1973. He said he had not seen his own father looking that young in more than 50 years. Claire watched him press his lips together and blink hard against his emotion. Something inside her shifted. This was not about old paper. It was about returning to people what time had stolen from them. And after Mr. Harold left, more calls came in from others seeking their family history. A retired nurse inquired about a school picture from Laurel Branch. A man from Ohio, whose mother always said she was from Pike County but never knew where, called. Next, the farm began to appear in conversations. Quietly at first, then more often. By that Saturday morning, 3 cars had made their way up the gravel drive, and Claire felt exposed with each arrival. The front porch was still weak, the house paint was still peeling away. Her suitcase remained in the back bedroom, but people no longer saw the house as Roger had. They were looking past the ruin toward what her grandmother had protected inside. That afternoon, a call came from Beverly at the library. Her voice was cautious.
Someone from the County Historical Society has heard about the records they want to visit, maybe to help, or perhaps to assess the collection.
Claire should have felt some relief. Instead, she looked at the parlor boxes and thought of that folded warning.
Do not give the clearance man access. This new visibility could either protect the farm or bring back the people Grandma had fought to keep out.
That evening, as the last of the visitors drove off, another car slowed down near the rusted mailbox. It did not turn in, it just paused long enough for Claire to see the driver raise a phone toward the house. Then the car moved on, leaving Claire on the porch, suddenly certain the farm was being watched. The car did not come back that night, but Claire still checked the window 3 times before going to bed. Once from the kitchen, once from the hallway, and once from the back bedroom where her suitcase still sat half open beside the wall. The road was empty each time. Still, the unsettling feeling remained. Someone had paused by the mailbox. Someone had lifted a phone. Someone had taken a picture of Grandma May's farm, as if the house itself had become evidence in a case. By morning, Claire told herself she was being foolish. People were simply curious, that was all. A few cars on an old road did not signal danger. But before noon, Sandra called Claire, had not heard her cousin's voice in nearly 8 months, not since Roger changed the locks. Not when Claire slept in her car, and not when she drove out to the farm with nothing but a suitcase and a key. Now Sandra's voice was full of concern, too much concern. She said she had heard people were visiting May's place. She asked if Claire was letting strangers inside the house. She asked if the papers there belonged to the entire family. She said old documents could create a liability, if handled incorrectly. Liability, Claire knew that word. Roger had used it, the county office had used it, now Sandra was using it. The word sounded practical, but it carried a clear warning inside it. By 3 o'clock, Sandra arrived with 2 relatives. Claire barely recognized anymore. She stepped onto the porch in clean ankle boots, looked once at the sagging boards, and made a face she tried to conceal, but Claire saw it. That small wince, the same look people give when they think poverty might be contagious. Inside, Sandra did not ask where Claire had been sleeping. She did not ask if she had food. She did not ask what Roger had done. Her eyes went directly to the boxes. So this is what all the fuss is about. It was not cruel, and that was the trick. Sandra spoke in the voice people use when they want control to sound like simple concern. She insisted the house was unsafe. She said the collection should be moved before moisture ruined it. She said the family must discuss what belonged to whom. Then she touched one of the parlor boxes Claire moved before she could think.
Please don't.
Sandra looked at her hand, then at Claire. It's family property.
Those are people's personal records.
Sandra gave a small laugh, not loud enough to be ugly. It was just enough to make Claire feel unreasonable. Evelyn. They're old papers. The words landed badly in the quiet room. Claire thought of Ruth's photograph of Mr. Harold's face when he saw his father as a boy. Of Tanya holding the envelope in both hands of Grandma May, writing names the world hadn't bothered to remember. For years, Claire would have softened, apologized, and stepped aside to keep the peace, but something within her had changed, not loudly.
No originals leave this house.
Sandra's face hardened for just a second, then smoothed over again. She mentioned a man who had offered to clear out the farmhouse after May died. She said it casually, like a memory she barely cared about a company from outside the county. Trucks, storage, disposal, fast work. Claire felt a familiar warning rise inside her go still.
What was his name?
Sandra shrugged. I don't remember. Some estate clean-out man, he said. The house needed emptying before it attracted problems. Problems, there it was again, a neat word for destroying things that nobody wanted to have to explain. Before Sandra left, she warned Claire not to make decisions she could not undo. Then she stepped carefully over the weak board and drove off without a look back. After that, the farmhouse felt different, less like a shelter, and more like a line someone had drawn that evening. Roger called, "Claire, let it ring." Then the voicemail came. He said Sandra was worried.
People are talking, you're embarrassing yourself, playing museum in a house that's falling down. You don't know what you are getting into.
For once, Claire believed him not because he was right about her, but because of Grandma May's warning, and now Sandra had given that warning a shape. An estate clean-out man. The house needed to be emptied quickly, but the parlor boxes were meant to be protected. Claire walked to her grandmother's old writing desk in the parlor's corner. Its drawers were swollen with age, the brass handles dull and tarnished. She tried the top drawer, it was stuck, the second drawer was empty, and the third would not move at all. Then she saw a small recipe tin on the shelf above the desk inside. Under yellowed cards, a single key was taped to the bottom. Claire carefully peeled the key loose. Her hand trembled slightly as she put it in the lock. This time, the drawer slid open. The drawer opened with a dry, scraping sound for a moment. Claire didn't reach inside. She just stood with her hand on the handle, listening to the quiet house. A deep stillness settled over the parlor. Even Tanya, standing behind her, seemed to hold her breath. The scent of old wood dust and the faint sweetness of long-dried lavender drifted from the drawer. Inside were 3 neat bundles tied with cotton string. Grandma May had not been one for hiding things. Not money, nor jewelry, nor secrets of any value, but this particular drawer had been locked, and that was significant. Claire lifted the first bundle and carefully untied it. On top was a handwritten inventory with box numbers, family names, and road names. It listed church names, dates, cross-references, and even notes about missing photographs. There were uncertain spellings, disputed birth years, and names changed after marriage or lost after migration. It was not perfect, but it was thorough. It represented page after page of Grandma May's attempt to create order from what the world had scattered.
She catalogued it all.
Claire nodded, her eyes already drawn to the second bundle. It held dozens of letters, some on lined notebook paper, others on proper church stationery. Some were on postcards with faded stamps, many addressed simply to Mrs. May Ward. Claire opened one. A woman named Ruth Freeman thanked May for saving the only photograph of her mother to survive a fire. Another letter was from a man in Ohio searching for his father's family, saying May was the first person in Pike County who took him seriously. A third, written in a shaky hand, pleaded, "Please keep this safe. My children will throw it away." Claire had to stop reading. It wasn't sadness that affected her so much as the profound trust in the words. People brought their last precious items to Grandma May, believing she would value them. Claire now understood that kind of trust in a new way. When a person has very little, the item they entrust to you may look small, like a single photograph. It could be a funeral card, a corrected name, or a memory, but sometimes that is the only proof they were ever here. The third bundle was thinner. Containing just a few papers. At the top was a draft of an agreement between Grandma May and the county library. Claire recognized the library's name from an old receipt. May had tried to find a formal home for the records. She had tried to ensure the family history collection on the farm would not die with her. But the agreement had never been signed. One signature line was blank. A note in the margin read, "They said there is no budget for ordinary people."
No budget for ordinary people.
It was what the world often said, just in different ways. No room, no time, no record, no reason to remember. Then Tanya touched the drawer.
There's another envelope.
Claire looked down at the very back. Tucked behind the bundles was a single sealed envelope. The paper had yellowed, but the handwriting was clear, for the one who comes back when she has nowhere else. A chill ran through Claire, something deeper than fear. She knew, even before opening it, that her grandmother had meant it for her. Perhaps not knowing her name or with any certainty, but through a deep, unshakable understanding. Grandma May had known the shape of a woman who might return home with nothing left but her shame. Claire sank into the parlor chair. Tanya stepped back toward the doorway, giving her some space. The envelope opened without any trouble. Inside was a letter in Grandma May's steady blue ink. Claire read it slowly. May wrote that people had laughed at the farm, seeing only what it lacked. It lacked new paint, good fencing, working fields, and money, but they never saw what it actually held. She wrote that people brought her pieces of their families because no official institution would keep them. No courthouse had room, and no one in authority felt that poor people's memories needed to be protected. She wrote that a town can erase a family by accident, and then it can call that silence history. Claire's fingers tightened their grip on the page. The letter continued. May explained she had refused to sell because any buyer would simply clear the house first. They would rent dumpsters, hire men, and toss all the boxes, calling the clean sweep progress. By the time anyone realized what was gone, The people in those boxes would be lost for a second time. Then the letter's tone shifted, turning to Claire. Her grandmother wrote that she had watched Claire grow quieter and more withdrawn after her marriage. May had seen the signs. Fewer visits, clipped phone calls, Roger speaking for Claire, whose smile never quite reached her exhausted eyes. In the letter, she wrote of her desire to step in, but an old woman's warnings are easily ignored when no one wants to see the truth. And so she kept the farm not from any vision of the future, but from knowing the truth of Claire's heart. You always cared for the people others overlooked. If life sends you back here with nothing, don't you dare believe you are nothing. Sometimes the person who has been erased is the only one who knows how sacred it is to be remembered. Claire covered her mouth. A silent gasp caught in her throat. The letter concluded with one final command. Do not let them turn this house into silence. And for a long time, Claire just sat there, completely still. Then, with deliberate hands, she folded the letter and set it on the table. When morning came, she had found her purpose. She would take her grandmother's inventory to the library, not to ask for validation, but to demand it, to make these records matter before they could be erased. The next morning, when Claire entered the Pike County Library, she clutched the inventory like it held the weight of generations, not just paper. She was wearing the same old worn coat. Her shoes were still dusty from the farm, and her hands still shook slightly as she pushed open the library door. But something inside her had shifted. She wasn't there to ask if the records were important. She was there to prove they were.
Beverly looked up from the desk. She saw the look on Claire's face first, then the folder.
Tanya arrived 20 minutes later, hair hastily pulled back. Her school badge still on. A man from the County Historical Society came next. Then came a woman from the courthouse records office. They gathered at a long table by the local history section. Claire placed her grandmother's inventory right in the middle. She placed the letter next to it, not the personal parts meant for her, but the pages that described the collection itself. The family names, the church records, the photos of unknown faces, the stories of children sent away, the misspelled names, the boxes of histories her grandma protected when no one else would, and at first, Claire simply let them talk. Their words were cautious and clinical: collection, materials, possible significance, historical value. Then one of the men stated the papers required evaluation before they could be deemed important.
They are already important.
The room fell silent. Claire's own voice sounded new to her, stronger than she knew. She continued, telling them about Ruth's photograph. She spoke of Tanya seeing her great-grandmother's face for the very first time. She told them of Mr. Harold finding a photo of his father, a barefoot boy next to a mule, and of the letters begging her grandmother to save what other families discarded.
These aren't just old papers. For some of these people, this is the only place their names still exist.
After that, no one interrupted her, not once, but the work ahead wouldn't be easy, and that would be too simple a story. There were forms to file, shelves to find, and leaks to patch, not to mention taxes, relatives to contact, and preservation rules she knew nothing about. But this time, she was not alone. Beverly arranged for the library to loan its scanner twice a week. Tanya brought students by after school, not to handle the delicate originals, but to help type up names from photocopies. The Historical Society provided archival sleeves and acid-free folders, and Bethlehem Chapel sent 2 men to fix the dining room roof. The county couldn't just erase the tax debt, but they did give Claire time, along with a payment plan. They gave her a letter of support, a reason to see the farm as more than just neglected land waiting for demolition. And that reason was built on Grandma May's legacy slowly. The farmhouse began to change. It didn't become a grand museum with marble floors and perfect lights. The house remained what it was, old. The porch still creaked in the cold, and the hall still smelled of cedar and dust. Paint still peeled in spots money hadn't reached yet, but the house no longer felt empty. The dining room was now the first archive room. A folding table now stood where boxes once risked being ruined by rain photographs were safe inside protective sleeves. Family histories were filed in labeled bins as a small scanner hummed by the window. A notebook lay open for visitors to add their own memories. Claire finally slept in a real bed again, a donated mattress resting on her grandmother's old iron frame. The first night she lay down, The sheer quiet of the house felt unfamiliar and strange. There was no steering wheel to grip, no glare from a parking lot light, no constant fear of a knock on the window. Just a solid roof above her, a quilt on her legs, and the quiet groans of a house happy to have a purpose once more. People arrived by appointment, not in crowds or for spectacle, just families. A retired nurse discovered a photograph of the one-room schoolhouse her mother attended. A man from Lexington found his grandfather's name spelled correctly for the very first time in any record he had seen. A woman brought a funeral program folded in a Bible and cried when Claire showed her 3 more relatives listed in Grandma's notes. Each visit left something new behind a name corrected, a face identified, a story added. The house grew less full of boxes and more full of voices. Roger drove past the house once Claire saw his truck slow as it neared the mailbox. For a moment, an old fear rose in her body before her mind could quiet it. Then she glanced behind her at Tanya labeling folders. She saw Beverly helping an older woman read a faded letter and Ruth's photograph resting safely in its sleeve. Roger did not stop. Maybe he saw the cars, maybe he saw the sign Tanya's students had painted and set up near the porch. The Ward Farm memory room. Perhaps he finally understood that Claire was no longer standing where he had left her. Or perhaps he understood nothing either way. His choices no longer decided her life. The quiet opening day came in late October, when the hills had turned to copper and gold. There was no ribbon to cut, no speeches too grand for the place. There were just neighbours walking up the gravel drive with paper bags of old photographs, church bulletins and family Bibles. They also brought questions they had carried for years. Claire placed Grandma May's portrait near the entrance, with a single sentence beneath it. She kept what others threw away then. Tanya brought Ruth's family folder to the table. The photograph was no longer loose or damp or unfinished. Beside Ruth's face were names, dates, church notes, and a copy of the envelope Grandma had marked for her people. Tanya simply stood there, her hand resting over her heart. Claire did not say much. She only opened the visitor notebook to the first clean page. For a long moment she held the pen just above it. Then she wrote the words Grandma had spent 40 years proving no one disappears here outside, the porch filled with the sound of soft footsteps. Inside, the old farmhouse held the names that the world had really lost. And Claire, who once slept in her car because one man decided she had no place left, stood in a doorway where forgotten people finally had a place to return. That was the real victory, not sudden wealth, not quiet revenge, not a man begging for forgiveness. It was a woman who found her own name again by protecting the names of others. And if this story makes you feel that people like Claire deserve to be seen before they are pushed to the edge, please like this video and subscribe. Stories like hers matter most when we refuse to look away. Let us know in the comments if you found a box of forgotten family records in an old house. Would you protect them, search for the families, or leave the past alone?
tao đẩy mày trong phim vừa được